Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really interesting concept, common sense.
Yeah, it's something we hear about all the time, isn't it? How it's maybe not so common anymore.
Exactly. Thinkers from Aristotle to, well, Voltaire, Emerson, they all talked about it. This kind of basic ability to see things clearly, understand them practically.
And G.K. Chesterton, who features quite a bit in our sources today, he basically said that when society loses its grip on common sense, well, that's when things start to go wrong.
Right. And that's really the lens for this deep dive, isn't it? We've looked at the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report,
Which includes Chesterton's essay Uncommon Sense, yeah.
and also news articles, some financial data. So the mission today.
It's pretty straightforward. We want to explore how this perceived lack of common sense, as the report's author sees it, might be shaping our economy, our society, even politics.
And crucially, what it could mean for you, the listener. Okay, so let's dive in. The report gives some examples of what the author thinks is, well, just a departure from common sense, especially in environmental policy.
Oh yeah, these are quite something, like an electric vehicle charging station powered by a diesel generator.
Seriously?
Yeah. And another one, a gas-powered van towing a diesel generator just to charge an electric car on the side of the road.
Wow. You almost don't know whether to laugh or cry, right?
It brings that Paulo Coelho quote to mind, doesn't it? Judge actions by their consequences.
Ah, good point. The intention might be green.
But if the execution involves burning more fossil fuels right there,
Yeah.
is it actually working? Is it logical? That's the question the report raises.
It makes you wonder.
And the report also briefly nods to Thomas Sowell's observations about the political left, suggesting this kind of disconnect isn't just limited to one area or group.
Okay, interesting. Now, the report then shifts gears quite significantly towards central banking and economic policy, and it gets pretty pointed.
It does. The author reacts very strongly to Ben Bernanke getting the Nobel Prize in economics, calls it a symptom of a profoundly sick society, even references Krishnamurti.
That's quite a statement.
It is. And the report backs this up by citing critics from the time. Brian M. Carney at the Wall Street Journal back in '08 basically said Bernanke was fighting the last war.
Meaning, like, using old tactics for new problems.
Precisely. And Anna Schwartz, a really respected economist, she made similar points in Barron's and the WSJ.
Yeah.
Famously regretted Milton Friedman wasn't alive to see it.
What was her main issue?
She argued the Fed just flooded the market with liquidity, maybe overlearning from the Great Depression, and that it wasn't effective for that crisis. She was adamant Bernanke didn't deserve reappointment.
And this is all happening while the market was tanking, right? The S&P 500 dropped massively between 2007 and 2009.
Huge drop. Yet the report points out Bernanke sounded quite optimistic even in mid-2008, just before the really big crash later that year.
Huh. Hindsight is 20/20, I guess, but still.
And then there's Paul Samuelson, another giant in economics. The report mentions his posthumous critique. He felt that macroeconomists trained in the '80s, like Bernanke, had become kind of complacent.
Complacent.
Yeah, like they weren't really ready for the unexpected, the unpredictable stuff, which is ironic considering Bernanke's PhD was actually on the Great Depression.
So, knowing the history didn't necessarily help navigate a new crisis.
That seems to be the suggestion. Maybe the nuances were different.
So the report's author sees these central bankers almost like central planners,
Yeah,
and that this has made finance incredibly complex.
exactly. Too complex maybe to be effectively managed top-down. It references Murray Rothbard's concern about, loud voices speaking from a position of ignorance in economics.
It also takes a quick swipe at modern monetary theory, MMT.
Right, using the volatility in the UK gilt market, that's UK government bonds, as an example of, again, what the author sees as theory detached from common sense reality.
Okay, moving on from economics. The report raises some pretty serious questions about mainstream narratives and even potential censorship.
Yeah, this part is quite provocative. It highlights a statement from Melissa Fleming, who's with the UN and the World Economic Forum.
What did she say?
She apparently stated that organizations like the UN and WEF own the science on climate change and partnered with Google to manage search results.
Own the science. That sounds strong.
The author certainly interprets it that way, suggesting it's about suppressing dissenting views. The report's tone here is, let's just say, deeply skeptical.
And this bumps up against ideas of free speech, surely.
Absolutely. The report brings up Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, freedom of opinion and expression,
Yeah.
and Justice William O. Douglas's very strong First Amendment stance in the U.S.
What was his view?
Basically, that you fight bad ideas with more speech, with truth, not by shutting down debate.
The report seems quite critical of Fleming herself, mentioning her background isn't in climate science.
Right, her background is more in communications, specifically for refugees. The report includes a quote from Carlos Ruiz Zafón about stupidity being compensated by ideology, applying it here.
Ouch.
The author expresses clear frustration at having to even engage with these kinds of narratives, linking it back to Fromm's idea of societal sanity and Rothbard's point about loud ignorance.
And it gives more concrete examples of this perceived disconnect.
Yes, it mentions the controversy around Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and the narrative about border agents whipping Haitian migrants.
Oh, I remember that.
The report alleges Mayorkas pushed this narrative despite evidence to the contrary, including emails and the photographer denying any whipping occurred. It cites Jonathan Turley calling for his resignation.
The author's language is probably quite strong there, too.
Very strong, yes. Framing it as a betrayal of trust and oath.
Okay. And then there's the Pfizer issue.
A really significant point the report highlights. It references Dutch MP Rob Roos, who revealed a Pfizer executive admitted under questioning that the vaccine wasn't tested for stopping transmission before its release.
Wow. Not tested for stopping transmission.
That's what the executive apparently admitted, according to Roos.
But wasn't that the whole basis for vaccine passports and mandates to stop the spread?
Well, that's exactly the implication Roos and the report draw. It raises huge questions about the justification for those policies, what Roos called institutional discrimination.
That's big.
The report throws in a Hilaire Belloc quote here about control of wealth being control of life, possibly linking it to pharmaceutical influence.
Does the author think anything will come of this, legally?
They express doubt about lawsuits against Pfizer succeeding, suggesting potential government coercion might protect the company, but it does note Pfizer's stock price took a hit.
And finally, in this section, Liz Truss.
Ah, yes. The report mentions her brief, tumultuous time as UK Prime Minister, specifically quoting John Grace's incredibly blunt description of a press conference after she sacked her Chancellor.
How did Grace describe it?
Called her out of touch. And the whole situation, the report uses his term, trust or fuck.
Okay. Very direct. Paints a picture of leadership completely disconnected.
Exactly. It's presented as another example of high-level decisions seemingly detached from basic common sense, leading to chaotic results.
So after laying out all these examples of, let's call it, uncommon sense in action, the report talks about a pushback, a rebellion of common sense.
Right. The idea is that ordinary people, maybe without fancy degrees, have a kind of gut instinct, a survival instinct, that kicks in when things just don't add up.
And where does the report see this happening?
It gives examples like parents pushing back against some teachers' union policies, hesitancy about certain vaccines after controversies, and people losing trust in big tech.
Like Facebook and Google, because of perceived censorship.
Exactly. Linked to things like the owning the science comment, people voting with their feet or maybe their clicks. The report points to the falling stock prices of Meta and Alphabet as possible signs of this eroding trust.
Which brings us back to G.K. Chesterton. What did he mean by uncommon sense? It's not what we usually mean, is it?
No, it's almost the opposite. For Chesterton, uncommon sense wasn't wisdom. It was these overly clever, intellectual ideas that sound smart but are actually illogical or nonsensical.
Like his example about chairs.
Yeah, the idea that all chairs being quite different is a contradiction. It sounds deep but ignores the basic concept of chairness that makes them chairs in the first place.
He had a way with words.
Definitely. The report mentions his comparison of Nietzsche's wild worship of lawlessness and Tolstoy's materialist worship of law.
And how they both lead to doing nothing.
Paradoxically, yes. And his quip about conservatives making mistakes and progressives preventing them from being corrected feels very relevant to politics today, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little too relevant, maybe.
The report also mentions a friend suggesting EU and German policies often lack common sense, pointing to the Eurozone's trade balance shift. And Chesterton's 1926 quote about being howled down for saying 2 and 2 make 4.
That ties back to the economists worried about deficits being ignored.
Exactly. That feeling of stating the obvious but being dismissed.
Then the report brings in this essay, The Death of Common Sense, by Laurie Borgman from 1998.
Yes, a very poignant piece. It lists examples of how regulations and social shifts seem to be chipping away at basic common sense even back then.
What kind of examples?
Things like a child getting in serious trouble for an innocent kiss, teens suspended for using mouthwash, teachers afraid to discipline, needing parental consent for sunscreen but not for abortion info, not being able to defend your home, the coffee spill lawsuit, situations that just seem disproportionate or illogical.
And she personifies it.
Yeah, she talks about common sense's deceased relatives, truth, trust, discretion, responsibility, reason, and its surviving stepchildren.
Let me guess.
I know my rights. I want it now. Someone else is to blame. I'm a victim, and pay me for doing nothing.
Wow, that paints a picture.
It really does. It's a powerful way to frame that feeling that something fundamental has been lost or is being lost, and we face a choice about whether to let it go.
Okay, so how does all this perceived lack of common sense translate into investment strategy, according to the report?
Well, the author sets the scene with music. Saint-Saëns' Dance Macabre.
The dance of death. Cheerful.
Huh. Well, the analogy is about death waking the skeletons to dance, similar to how the Federal Reserve keeps reviving markets with money printing.
Okay, I see the parallel.
But the report contrasts the skeleton's obedience with the financial sector, which tends to blame others' free markets or the Fed for raising rates when things go wrong.
Even though rates were historically low for so long and still negative in real terms.
That's the paradox the author highlights. And it leads into a discussion about Cathie Wood of ARK Innovation.
Her open letter questioning the Fed's rate hikes, warning about deflation.
Exactly. The report notes she focused on lagging indicators like inflation and employment data.
But the report is critical of her stance.
Very. It points out she didn't raise the same alarms during the easy money period that, massively benefited her funds.
So the author sees it as inconsistent.
Calls her one of those stepdaughters of common sense. Someone else is to blame. I'm a victim. It includes a chart showing ARKK's sharp decline.
Ouch. So who does the report trust for economic signals?
Interestingly, it contrasts official optimism-like statements from Biden and Yellen with a CNN poll showing most Americans feel the economy is poor. And it points to 3M stock price.
Oh, it's a better indicator. Why 3M?
Because it's a huge, diversified industrial company, kind of a bellwether for the global economy. The report argues its valuation is hitting levels typically seen in recessions. Mentions ITW, Illinois Tool Works, as similar.
So recession likely, but maybe not an immediate crash.
That's the view. Because markets seem quite oversold, bonds and stocks and investor sentiment is extremely bearish. Lots of short positions, lots of put buying by retail investors.
Like the bad news is already priced in.
To a large extent, potentially. But, and this is a big but, the report stresses how fast rates have risen and how liquidity is tightening, both in the U.S. and globally.
It mentions Andy Lee's analysis.
Yes, on the big drop in U.S. money supply, MZM, and how the strong dollar is hurting everyone else. Includes that Alan Blinder quote about central bankers hating to be the first to admit the truth.
But even with rates rising, real rates are still negative.
Deeply negative, yeah. Which leads to a key investment question the author poses.
If you had $1 million, stocks or bonds for the next 5 years?
Despite the gloomy outlook, the author argues for equities, long-term, based on the idea of long interest rate cycles.
Interesting. Any specific markets favored?
Yes, Latin America gets a positive mention. Argentina and Brazil were apparently up nicely in 2022, and Turkish stocks too, because loose money and currency collapses have made valuations very low, potentially attractive. The author also talks about their own Thai stock portfolio.
As a local hedge?
Yeah, against potential foreign exchange controls. Notes its performance and mentions value stocks generally lagging.
So the overall theme is equities over bonds while real rates are negative.
Right, but with a big worry that more market pain could just lead to more money printing.
The uncommon sense policies leading to a potential dollar collapse?
That's the fear expressed. The author disagrees with the dollar shortage theory, blaming dollar strength on worse policies in Europe and Japan.
Hoping the public there wakes up.
Hopes for a public demand for more common sense policies once the wealth destruction hits home. References James Burnham's bleak view of liberalism as the ideology of Western suicide.
Wow, okay. And the final investment thought experiment, solitary confinement.
Yes. 10 years, one asset class, no cash flow needed. What do you hold?
And the answer is?
Precious metals, specifically platinum, which the author sees as being at a great entry point right now.
Platinum, okay. And that leads into the Argentina update.
Exactly. It revisits the Latin America theme and brings in Jonathan Kelly from Ayers Investment Management for a closer look at Argentina.
Right. Argentina, no country for old men, part 2. What's changed since his last piece?
Well, the global backdrop, mainly. Risk markets peaked, the Fed and ECB started hiking rates aggressively, while the Bank of Japan kept easing, weakening the yen. Argentine sovereign bonds got hit hard.
Down significantly.
Yeah, like negative 39% year-to-date, according to one index. But
But
Argentine corporate and provincial bonds, especially U.S. dollar ones from YPF, the energy company, have actually done well. Double-digit gains in some cases.
so investors shifted focus.
Seems so. Kelly mentions a Bloomberg report on that shift. And the Argentine stock market, in U.S. dollar terms, was actually up slightly, with YPF up massively.
So Kelly's original thesis still holds. The three-legged stool.
He argues it does. Leg 1, valuations are still compelling. Leg 2, the debt restructurings and the IMF deal provide a kind of bridge through the 2023 elections.
And leg 3.
The call option on political change. The possibility of a more market-friendly government coming in after 2023.
How do valuations look now?
Spreads on sovereign bonds widened compared to other high-yield bonds, which isn't great. But Kelly argues they look attractive compared to, say, Ecuador or even post-default Sri Lanka. And yields on YPF and other quality corporates are still very high.
And the debt payments are manageable for now.
Relatively low through 2023-24 because of the restructurings. So default before the election seems less likely, even though the underlying problems, deficits, inflation, money printing, are still severe. The blue chip swap rate is a key stress indicator to watch.
What about the politics? Any signs of change?
Kelly mentions the appointment of Sergio Massa as super minister, trying to stabilize things and stick to the IMF plan. And politically, yes, the Peronists lost the 2021 midterms, and polls show the opposition Cambiemos coalition gaining strength.
So, potential for a change in government.
It's looking more likely. Kelly draws a parallel to the market rally before the 2015 election, when markets anticipated change.
So the bottom line on Argentina.
Still very risky, not a fundamentally good credit yet. But Kelly argues the potential upside is huge if things just go from, horrible to simply bad.
And he recommends his firm for navigating this.
Yes, Ayers Investment Management. He highlights their active approach, experience in Argentina, their fund's track record, and their role in the restructurings. Provides contact info, too.
And the report ends with a Michener quote.
Yeah, from the Fires of Spring about the importance of finding oneself. And a little note that Michener and historian Barbara Tuchman never won Nobel Prizes. A final subtle jab, perhaps.
So to sort of wrap this all up, this deep dive, guided by the report, has really walked us through this idea of declining common sense.
Yeah, looking at environmental policies, central banking, media narratives, social stuff, all through that critical lens.
And connecting it to potential market impacts, like that contrarian call on Argentina.
And I think the main takeaway, really, is the importance the author places on questioning things, on not just accepting the prevailing narrative.
Something we know you, our listeners, value, looking at things from different angles, having those aha moments.
Definitely.
So maybe the closing thought is this. In a world where common sense seems increasingly debated, maybe the most valuable thing you can do is cultivate your own judgment.
Yeah, based on fundamental principles and really looking critically at the information you're given.
What are the examples of uncommon sense you see playing out, and what might the long-term consequences be?
It's a lot to think about. We've really only scratched the surface today.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.